Good morning, everybody. It is Friday today, yay! And it is time for this week's episode of Friday Feast. Breathe, Sally, breathe. I feel like, when you feel like you've forgotten something, like I feel like I've forgotten something this morning. It's not water because my husband put water here for me, but I feel like I have. Anywho, moving on. Welcome everybody to Sally Goodwin Ministries, this platform that is a launch pad for Church Without Walls, fabulous community of people that all of you would just love to get to know better. Joyful Jolene is one of them. Good morning, my lovely. Egera Prophetic School, less than a week until the in-person school starts. Yay! And then the week after that, the online school starts. Yay! Cannot wait to see the beautiful faces of those that I love so very, very much. And of course, Activate Her, which is an NPC that works towards empowering, activating, inspiring, and encouraging women. And so because all of those things, imagine having a separate Facebook page, Instagram page, TikTok, website for all of those different things. Imagine that. No, can't you? No, me neither. So it all sort of is loosely held, very loosely held under Sally Goodwin Ministries. So welcome everyone, beautiful Brigitte, Radiant Roz, good morning. Terrific Tamsin, welcome my lovely. And I have a list, a stream, a conglomeration, if that makes any sense to you, of unanswered WhatsApps. If you are one of those people who WhatsApped me between Wednesday and yesterday and I haven't replied to you yet, please, I'm going to endeavor to respond to all of my WhatsApps today. Yesterday was a specialist day for me. In other words, it was a day I went to the specialist. A day of specialist, doctor, scans, all the things. And by the end of it, I'm always just absolutely exhausted. Wonderful Wendy, so good to see you. So beautiful Bertha, welcome my lovely. So magnificent Michelle, good morning. The good news is Simone, special Simone, so good to see you. Famous Chantal, so good to see you. Natasha, my lovely, welcome, welcome. The good news is this, that my gorgeous cool welcome, the liver disease that I have, primary biliary cholangitis, it hasn't gotten any worse. So in fact, 2 of the little pipes or bile ducts or whatever, the doctor calls them, are actually open now, whereas before they were closed, inflamed and closed. Significant Sylvia, welcome. They are now open. So my liver is in. Beautiful Bridget, welcome my darling. My liver is in. So good to have you on the live. I know you can't always make it. So good to have you on the live. Auntie Evie, good to see you. My liver is in like a holding pattern. So it hasn't gotten worse. It hasn't gotten worse. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. It hasn't gotten any worse. It actually there has been some improvement. So that is just amazing. So I will have to have my liver monitored every 6 months at least for the rest of my life, barring a miracle, which obviously we all know is completely possible, because I have what they call hemangiomas or lesions on my liver that are not, lovely Louise, welcome all the way from New Zealand, lesions on my liver that are not, they're not cancer at the moment, and hopefully never. We trust they will never be cancer. They are some like hemangioma, I don't know, some weird name, that they just are there, but they have to be monitored in case they start to grow, because if they start to grow, they have grown slightly, but not enough to worry anybody. And I also have a few of them, not just the one anymore. There's more than one. So my liver is taking a fair amount of strain, But it is good because it isn't any worse. So praise the Lord for that. And then the fibromyalgia, again, barring a miracle, there is nothing anybody can do for that. Lovely Lucinda, amazing Anthea, beautiful Brigitte, thank you. But what they do if any of you has experience with fibromyalgia, what they do when they test you, wonderful Volna, welcome, significant Silver, good morning, is you have like 18 pain points, specific pain points that point, if you have pain in a fair amount of those points, then that pain points towards fibromyalgia. So what the doctors do to test that is they press on those pain points to see if there's still pain. So obviously that just stirs everything up, However, also a wonderful set of good news. My doctor, if you can hear the waste truck, the dirt truck, it is our wonderful waste technicians collecting our waste. Bless them, Jesus. Thank you for the work that they do. Sorry, it sounds very loud outside, but there we go. They'll be gone in a mo. So, but this time he said to me that there is an injection that he can give me that should hopefully mean that I remain pain-free for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of no pain, people. I'm just like, I will get that. Thank you very much. 6 weeks of no pain. However, the injection was so painful. The injection was so painful that literally last night I couldn't sleep on the side of my body containing the injection. The injection was so painful. And of course, all of the pushing and prodding woke all of those pain synapses up, So yeah, I had a very bad night. My beautiful Bertha friend, thank you for saying I look tired. I am tired. I had a very bad night. Nigeria is in the house. Welcome, Nigeria. Welcome, welcome. We love you guys. We love Nigeria. We love what you bring to Africa. So there we go. So the injection apparently it starts working within 10 minutes. So we'll see how long I can go pain-free for. That would be just amazing. But today my body is just like, it's like, I am sore, I am tender, I am very much not happy with what happened yesterday. Can we just take a day and just like, so last night was a very bad night. But my beautiful Bridget friend, it is your birthday today. Are you one of those people who don't like your age to be known, or are you willing to tell me how old you are, Bridget, my lovely, so that I can have a look and see symbolically, numerically what God has for you, not numerology, people. The biblical meaning of numbers, the biblical numbers have a meaning. But even without the numbers, my beautiful Bridget, I am going to just release this over you, that last year, you ended off last year with God gently ushering you out of your comfort zone and into the wide blue yonder, full of the promise and the destiny that He has for you. And my beautiful Bridget friend, this year is going to be an epic year for you. It is going to be an epic year for you because God, you have taken a step of faith and God is honoring that. He's going to meet you smack bang where you took that step of faith, and He's going to be part of every single bit of the process as you walk out this next season and what it looks like for you and Him. And I see you say you are 53 wonderful years old. Good woman. Glad that you're happy with your age. I think we should all just be happy with our age because, I mean, really, isn't it wonderful to be 55? I'm going to be 56 this year. Is it not wonderful to be 55 going on 56? I love my 50s. My 50s are amazing. Oh my goodness. All of that worry about what people think of me has just disappeared into the wide blue yonder that way. Okay, 53. So 53, the numeric association The Biblical Numeric Association for the number 53 is satisfactory service, where you have become one with Christ in such a manner that your service has become acceptable before the Lord and His grace has been poured over you. Beautiful Bridget, this is so for you. This is so you. But as you now sally forth into your 54th year, 54 speaks of judgment in your favor. It is the number of the Hebrew word dan, which means to judge. It speaks of favorable judgment in your favor. And it also means that an outcome that you could be waiting for, whether it is an opinion, a business transaction, or an answer from the Lord, has been assessed. And the opinion that will be expressed will be in your favor. So bless you, my lovely. Have a fabulous birthday today. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I trust that each one of you have been getting out of bed, have been sitting up in your bed in the morning, putting your feet on the floor and saying, let God arise and his enemies be scattered. Let all who hate him flee before him. Because remember, we were speaking on Wednesday about how our physical being, even mine with all of its aches, pains, and issues, even mine, is a temple for the Most High God, is your Ark of Covenant, because no longer does God only enter into covenant with specific individuals and their nations, but he has entered into covenant with the bringing of his Son, with the releasing of the Holy Spirit. He is bringing into covenant each one of us individually. And we spoke about that. And today we're going to speak about something, and I can already tell just in my conversation with the Lord this morning that this subject could be a bit convoluted, and so please, I need you to follow. I need you to follow me as I bring this word this morning, because even in my mind it feels a bit convoluted. But today's the day. Today's the 23rd of Shevat. 23rd of Shevat, and according to Jewish history and Jewish tradition, today on the 23rd of Shevat, the War of Benjamin began. Now, you might not all have read about the War of Benjamin, but it was basically a war, an Israeli war, when all of the tribes went to war against the tribe of Benjamin, and they almost decimated them. They almost wiped them out. There were like a few hundred Benjamites left after that war. And then they had to, lovely Lydia, so good to have you on the live. Wonderful. And then they had to, come up with all absolutely terrible ways of allowing the tribe of Benjamin to prosper, because they couldn't wipe them out completely, because they're one of the 12 tribes of Israel. So I want to look at that passage of scripture today, because one of the things that I spoke about over the last couple of lives, I can't remember if it was Wednesday or Monday, we read the passage Psalm 68 from the Message translation. And in the Message translation, it speaks about the little Benjamins leading. And I spoke about how we need to be raising up the generations after us. We need to be raising them up to lead. And then also just obviously everything that is happening in the church globally at the moment, everything that is going on, all the yuck, all the nonsense, all the falling apartness that's happening right now. And the opinions that believers have, that we, as believers, we have such strong opinions, and we don't seem to be able to agree to disagree. We just seem to, if you do not agree with me, then I need to take you down in the most vile, hateful possible way on social media. That's believers I'm talking about. So, and so I want this story that we're going to read today about the war on Benjamin. It's also indicative of how far Israel had fallen by the end of the book of Judges, how far Israel had fallen from God. And then it prophetically speaks to us about us and the future generations, when we as boomers or Gen Xers or whomever we are, refuse to let go of control. And you see this in governments all around the world. Okay, you see this in governments all around the world. Most nations have a retirement age, and their government is way past retirement age. But those people, they do not like to let go of control. And we see this in church situations, in ministry spaces where you have church leadership that is of a certain age or of a certain, season in the kingdom of the Lord, and they refuse to let go of their control and hand it off. They do not trust the younger generations with that. And then you have obviously the church as a whole, where the moment we disagree, we just attack each other with the most vicious, vociferous, vindictive, absolutely horrendous words and comments and death threats and things on social media. So I've set the stage, okay? So let us have a look at what I'm talking about. So basically what I'm reading from Women of Significance, Volume 2, Women of Significance, Volume 2, Women of Significance, Volume 2. I'm reading from this. Sorry, I'm really tired, so I'm a bit like a goldfish. So let's read the story the way I wrote it in Women of Significance, Volume 2. And this is on page 11, and it's called The Levite's Concubine. And the verse that I put at the top was Psalm 47, verse 7 to 8. For God is the King of all the earth. Sing praises in a skillful psalm, and with understanding, God reigns over the nations. God sits on his holy throne. So it doesn't matter who pops up and thinks they're king. It doesn't matter what earthly kings we have. It doesn't matter what people we have who wish they were king or would like to make themselves king or anything like that. The only king that we have on the earth is God. The only king that we have over the earth is God. God is the king. God reigns over nations. Okay, so at this point in Judges, the book of Judges tells you that there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. Now, we often read that as there was no earthly king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. And that's absolutely true. Yes, there was no earthly king in Israel at that time because they hadn't ever had a king, right? But God had constantly told them that he was king over Israel. But the book of Judges tells us there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. In other words, Israel had reached the point where not only was there no earthly king because they'd never had an earthly king, but they weren't even recognizing God as the king over their nation. They might have been going through the motions to a degree, some of them still doing the religious thing, all the rituals and the fastings and the sacrifices and the things God had told them to. There might have been some of them who were still doing that, but God was not king over Israel. They had walked away from him pretty much. Now listen to what the Amplified Bible says about this statement. The Amplified Bible says this. This statement is made 3 times in these latter chapters. All was well while Joshua and those who assisted him lived. Then gradually came disorder. What is the meaning of this? There was no king or counselor in Israel, because it can be translated like that as well, because there was no God. Pay attention to that. There was no king or counselor in Israel because there was no God. It wasn't that God wasn't there. It wasn't that God wasn't still reigning over all the earth, but they refused. They refused to walk in the covenant that God had made with them. The Lord is king. You cannot have a true king if you don't have God. Can we just say that again? You cannot have a true king if you don't have God. Because who is the only true king? God. You cannot have a true king if you don't have God. There was no nominal renunciation of God, no public and blatant atheism, no boastful impiety. There was a deadlier heresy. So they hadn't stood up and said, we don't want God anymore. We're breaking our covenant. We're walking away. They hadn't actually said, we are atheists now. We don't believe in God. Or we're now agnostic. We don't believe in God. Or we are now believing in this one or that one or the next one. No, they didn't do that. There wasn't a standing up and declaring their stance that they didn't want God to be their king. Listen to this. There was a deadlier heresy. There was a deadlier heresy, and this deadly heresy we can see in the nations. Namely, keeping God as a sign, but paying no tribute to him as a king. Worshipping him possibly in outward form, but knowing nothing of the subduing and directing power of godliness. So it's when, we sing things like God Save the Queen. We keep God as a sign. It's like when we go into a courtroom in some nation on the earth and put our hands on the Bible and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, but we don't actually believe in God. We're keeping God as a sign, but we pay no tribute to him as a king. We worship him outwardly, but we show nothing of the power of godliness in our lives. That is more to be dreaded than any intellectual difficulty of a theological king. Dead consciences, prayerless prayers, mechanical formalities. These are the impediments which overturn the chariots of progress. And this was the case in Israel. Where God is the king, where God is, the king is not merely a man with a crown on, but a king in the sense of kingliness, sovereignty, authority, and rule. The spirit of obligation and responsibility. You will find the right monarch where you find the right God. So what this is saying is it doesn't mean there can't be a king, but a true king knows that God is king over him. And we have very few monarchs left on the earth today, but those that we know of, would we say that they worshipping the right God and therefore the right monarch? I don't think we could say that, not at all. So, does any of the above resonate with our world today? Absolutely yes. What were the consequences for Israel? Because Israel is a microcosm of the things that happen to nations around the earth. Israel, for all that that she is the apple of God's eye, that she is God's first, love, that we grafted into that particular vine, all of that is also to say that Israel is a warning from the Lord. God says to the nations, look at Israel, do you see what's happening? Don't do those things. Does anybody heed those warnings? No, they do not. The ultimate consequence then in Judges was civil war and the death of tens of thousands of Israelites. However, as is so often the case, a woman was impacted first. The final decline of Israel in the book of Judges starts with women. Because as a society treats women worse and worse, there goes that society. An unnamed woman who was the concubine of a Levite priest who was supposed to be holy and righteous and pure before the Lord, but who was not walking at all in his Levitical anointing. So this woman is referred to as both the Levite's concubine and his wife, and the text seems unsure as to the exact nature of their relationship. Please love and share, my darlings, if you wouldn't mind. She leaves him and she runs away to her father's house. The text implies, because a lot of our translations and interpretations and things like that were originally done by men. And so the text implies that she was unfaithful. But research, if you look into Jewish research, tells us that she left due to abuse. This was a woman who was either his concubine or his wife, and she was being abused. Okay, so she runs away to her father's house. After 4 months, he doesn't rush off to find her. After 4 months, he finally goes to find her. But her father delays them from leaving for as long as possible. And the text implies it is to protect his daughter. We don't know exactly if that is true, but that's the implication. Finally, they leave late, and the Levite insists they stay over at Gibeah, clearly thinking they will be safer in an Israelite stronghold. Wasn't safe to be wandering the streets at night in Israel anymore, because there was no God. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. There was no one obeying any kind of law. So the streets of Israel at night were not safe. Whilst there, some men from the city come to the house where they are lodging, and they demand to be with the Levite's concubine or wife. And now this is just reminds us of the story of Lot. The old man who owns the house offers his virgin daughter. I'm sorry, but when I read these things about offer, women were just offered. Oh, well, just take my daughter, and just take my wife. Oh, just take my... The Lord and I have had so many conversations about this, and just so many like, Jesus, really, why? God always just reminds me of free will. So the old man who owns the house offers his virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine to the men instead, which, as I've said, shades of Lot and his daughters. One of them, either the old man or the Levite, the text isn't completely clear, shoves the concubine out the door to the waiting men and slams the door. They assault her all night long. This woman, who already has, according to research, who has already fled from her husband because of abuse. Then he comes to fetch her back. She's just left the safety of her father's house. She has just left the safety of her father's house, and this is what she walks into. Eventually, she crawls back to where the Levite is staying. She dies. He doesn't even realize she's dead. If you actually read the story in Judges, she's lying on the threshold of the house and coming into the house. She hasn't even made it back inside the house. And he has to prod her a bit to actually realize that she's dead. So he's very upset that she's dead. Can't even. He's very upset that she's dead. And instead of taking a bit of responsibility and being like, wow, we shouldn't have stayed here. We shouldn't have traveled so late at night. I shouldn't have, I should have stood, and not just handed her over to the people who wanted her. Maybe I should have done something differently. Am I responsible for the situation? Am I accountable to anyone for the situation? Instead of doing any of those things, no responsibility taken for the situation, he finds himself and his dead either wife or concubine. No responsibility taken. What he does, it must have been an mental aberration, it's the only thing I can think of, is he cuts her body up into 12 pieces and sends a piece to each tribe of Israel, demanding retribution. He cannot take responsibility for his actions, and so he demands that Israel take responsibility. Can we stop for a moment? Can we just, think of governments, leaderships, nations, when the government do not take responsibility for their shoddy governance, for the stupid things that they have done, but the people are the ones who bear the brunt, who bear the responsibility. And I said, this story breaks my heart. It really does. It breaks my heart every time I read it. That woman's death is often overlooked considering the war that followed. But God made sure that her story was included because he is not silent about such atrocities. God is not silent. He made sure that story was included for all eternity so that we could learn from it. The book of Judges is filled with women. More so than any other book in the Bible. There are more women referred to in the book of Judges than any other book in the Bible. You just go and read the book of Judges and highlight all the women mentioned. There are so many women mentioned in the book of Judges. It is easy, therefore, to track the regression in the way women were treated as Israel moved further and further away from God. Judges is both a microcosm and a prophetic statement about Israel. It is a microcosmic viewpoint of how Israel went round in circles effectively, following God, not following God, being attacked, crying out to God, raising up a deliverer, God raising up a deliverer, being successful, a few years of peace, walking away from the Lord, being attacked. And those cycles, if you read Judges carefully, those cycles get shorter and shorter and shorter. And the way women were treated at the beginning of the book of Judges and the way women are being treated by the end of the book of Judges tells a story in itself about the regression of the nation of Israel. And that is microcosmic viewpoint of the world, of nations. You can apply that view, that biblical worldview, to any nation and see that the way you treat your women and your children, not so that everyone can see how you're treating them. I've preached in many spaces where the words that have been said are, we believe that women can minister. We believe that women should be able to lead. Those are the words that are spoken because those spaces acknowledge that it helps to say those things, because it's like you're up there, like fighting for women, etc. But when you are in that space, that is not true. That is not true. They say the words, but the actions belie those words. Just one example of the lack of integrity in the global religious, idolatrous, man-made structure that we call church today. The lack of integrity that is there, where one thing is said because it's trendy, good for, social media presence, etc. But the way it's worked out, no, not so much, not so much. So we might look at nations and think, well, nations have come a long way in their treatment of women, and women can get jobs, and women, any job, and women can do this, and women can do that, etc., etc. Women are still being sold into slavery. Women are still being trafficked. Women are still having to sell their selves to support families. Women are still running households because men have gone off and done something different. Women are still raising children on their own. It's the language that comes out says no, it's not like it used to be. And in many ways it isn't like it used to be, thank the Lord. But the way women are treated, it's like racism. We bring in all of these laws to say that there will be no racism. But the way we treat people shows people. You can bring all the laws in any nation on the earth. But how are you treating those people that are a different color to you? Because laws are wonderful, but what are those people experiencing on a daily basis? I look at, the African Americans and the way that they have all the rights now in America. It's all. But how are they treated? They're not treated like that in day-to-day ordinary life. And obviously, this is a generalization. It's not like that everywhere. But I'm just trying to give you today examples so that you can understand how deep the lack of integrity runs in believers, in the church spaces, and why it is so important. So important. So important. We cannot have leaders or even politicians. We cannot elect in government officials because we like what they say, but they don't live that out in their own lives. And you might say to me, well, Sally, then we wouldn't have anybody. Well, maybe then we could weed out those ones and find the ones that actually do love their nation and love their nation's people and want their nation to not be the biggest and the best in the world, but to love God. And this isn't a call to legislate Christianity. That doesn't work. Constantine tried it, and he caused immense damage to the church. Some of that damage the church has never recovered from. But if loving God is just something that, we accept that there are different religions, and that is okay. We're not going to force you all to be Christian. You cannot force people to believe in a God they don't believe in. They have to encounter him for themselves. But there is an acknowledgement that God is actually king. So this was my little takeout from that, daughter of God. As our society moves further and further away from the one and only true God, women bear the brunt. But it is also us women who get to rise and say no more. It is us women who get to stand up and refuse to be silenced. It is us women who get to celebrate, support, love, and encourage other women to rise and to stand up. It is us women who get to raise the banner of the Lord and influence society by showing them Jesus. And not always gentle Jesus, meek and mild, but also the Jesus who turned over the tables in the temple. Also the Jesus who loved, honored, and elevated women. Also the Jesus who may have left as a lamb, but will return as a lion. Daughter of God, it is time for our voices to be heard. So we move from that into the story, the ending of that story. So what happens? All of the men who attacked the Levite's concubine or wife that were from the tribe of Benjamin. They were from the tribe of Benjamin. And so Israel, the different tribes of Israel, went to war against the tribe of Benjamin. Now, the tribe of Benjamin, remember, Benjamin was the youngest of Jacob's sons. Remember also that the tribe of Benjamin was the smallest. Okay, but they were known for their warfaring ability. They had archers that were second to none. They were known to be able to war well. And they stood their ground against the rest of the tribes. They fought back. But eventually the sheer numbers of the rest of the tribes brought them down to the point where they had 600. There were 600 Benjamite men left. Understand this. They slaughtered the rest of the tribes, slaughtered men, women, and children, until there were only 600 men left of the tribe of Benjamin. Because one man couldn't stand up and take responsibility for his actions. A whole tribe almost got wiped out. One man couldn't just be accountable and say, I just made mistake after mistake after mistake here. But blamed everything that happened. Instead of taking responsibility for what happened, he just shifted the blame. And because of that, a whole tribe was almost decimated. Now, can we see the enemy's hand in this? Yes, we can. Why? Saul, the first king of Israel that God chose, was Saul. He was a Benjamite. Paul, the Apostle Paul, who wrote all of those letters in the New Testament that we base a lot of our lives on, he was a Benjamite. The tribe of Benjamin might have been the smallest, and it might have been the least, seen as the least of the least within Israel. But God had plans for some Benjamites, and they needed, to actually fit into they had a destiny, and the enemy tried to wipe that destiny out by destroying that tribe. Just think about that for a moment. Think about the people around the world being affected by government policies and decisions and things. And think of the destiny and the purpose on those people's lives, those people who are all made in the image of God, whether they believe or don't believe. They might not be children of God, but they're made in the image of God, and God has a destiny, God has a purpose, God has a place. And then the enemy comes and he gets someone to write some policy that just decimates. Not the Lord. And then this is what happens. So what happens is there are 600 Benjamite men left, but they're only men. They cannot reproduce their tribe to ensure that the lineage of their tribe continues because everybody else has been slaughtered. So what do the Israelites do? They go to a place called Jabesh Gilead. They go to a place called Jabesh Gilead and they kill everyone there. And they take 400 virgins. So, oh no, now we have a problem. We have all these men and no one to marry them. So we're just going to go to Jabesh Gilead. We're just going to slaughter everyone. We're going to take 400 virgins. But now they're still 200 short. So what they do is the daughters of Shiloh would come out and dance in the vineyards and the fields at a specific time in the Hebrew calendar. And so the rest of the Israelite tribes, they say to the Benjamite men, okay, here's 400 virgins, and so we give you permission to kidnap the 200 of the daughters of Shiloh that come out to dance. We give you permission to kidnap them. So we have 600 women being taken against their will to assure that the Benjamite tribe survive. So there's a woman called Pamela Wolford, and she wrote this article called The Silence That Shouts. And I want to read it to you. The book of Judges closes on 400 Gilead women who have witnessed the massacre of their families. It's in my book, volume 2. Who fear and possibly even hate their Benjamite husbands and who are rearing the next generation of girls. There are 200 abducted Shiloh brides rearing the next generation of girls. There is an entire nation of Israelite women rearing the next generation of girls, all of whom have seen or heard what happened to the concubine and the brides of Benjamin. All of those women in all of the different tribes would have seen what happened to the concubine and the brides of Benjamin. Would any woman in Israel be so foolish as to risk allowing herself an individual identity after seeing that all happen? What woman would not question God's love for her when he seems to have not cared enough to deliver them from the abuse of men? Why do we get women walking away from church, walking away from God, walking away from faith? Because of what has been done to them. And they cannot believe in a God that they feel could possibly condone those things. What did these women teach their daughters? What did these women, if all your people were slaughtered and you were taken and forced to marry a Benjamite man, or you were just dancing in the vineyards, a beautiful celebratory space, and you were just kidnapped to marry a Benjamite man, and then you have daughters from that man, what do you teach them? What does the relationship between those husbands and wives look like? What does the relationship, pay attention to this, what does the relationship between men and God look like after the men having cast aside the very thing that God said was for their good? When God made women, when God made Eve, he said to Adam, this is for your good. This is going to be amazing. You're going to be this incredible team. You're going to be this incredible partnership. You're going to be equals. They cast aside the very thing that was good. Is it possible to truly know God? Pay attention to this, men and women. Is it possible to truly know God through only half of his image? No. It's not possible to know anybody through only half their image. As the story of Judges plays out, we witness God See if you can see this in the nations. We witness God silently lift his hand of restraint from Israel and give them over to their depravity. In the aftermath, thousands are dead. Thousands are dead, but that is not the end of it. The answer to God's silence lies more in the question Judges raises than in the solution, which does not appear until Jesus' birth, death, and resurrection. The consequence of Israel's ultimate sin follows them throughout the Old Testament. The abuse of women that began in Genesis comes full circle in Judges. The husbands of Israel were cut off from a full relationship with their wives simply by their subjugation of them. While that is a great loss on its own, the greater loss is the fullness of the knowledge of God through the loss of relationship with half of his image, women. And so it stood. And so it stood until Jesus redeemed the events in Judges through his restoration of women. He taught the women. They called him Rabboni. He would not, sorry, I've lost my place. He taught the women. They called him Rabboni. He would not condemn the adulteress, and he loved the Samaritan woman. He brought women full circle back to the status they enjoyed at the outset of Judges when he commissioned Mary Magdalene, the first human to see the resurrected Lord, to go and tell the men, as Deborah had. So in Judges, Deborah, judge over Israel, mother of Israel, she's called in the scriptures, sits in the gates, giving judicial decisions and communicating law and making decisions for the Israeli people. Here's God calls her to be Deborah, who goes into war. And when she goes into war, what does God say? God says, you go and tell the men, go and tell Barak, go and tell that we are going to go into war. And Jesus, when Mary Magdalene is the first human being to see the resurrected Christ, a woman. And you see how deep, how intentional God is, how deep the layers of meaning are. That Jesus says to Mary Magdalene, go and tell the men exactly the way Deborah had, exactly the instruction Deborah had followed, to go and tell the men. He repeats that with Mary Magdalene and restores what has been broken, what has been abused, what has been oppressed, what has been put down, what has been assaulted. He restores that in that moment. He restores women to where they should be. So this is for all of us, men and women. This is not just for women. This is for all of us, men and women. That we know that God sees us, God knows us, God loves us. And God sent Jesus to restore women to their rightful place as the other half of his image. There is a very biblical women's liberation movement. And it began over 2,000 years ago when Jesus came to earth. We like to think we started those things. We didn't start those things. Jesus started those things. But can you see in the story how one man's decision impacted generations? Can you see how nations, we are so quick to say, how can God let this happen? How can God let that happen? How can God allow this? How can God allow that? We're so quick to say that. And yet, as nations, we choose against God over and over and over again, so that he lifts his hand of restraint and is just like, now you just do you. And I'm going to move sovereignly because I can't rely on you anymore. And in all of those nations, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Sally, there are governments and there are politicians and there are people who make decisions and there's nothing we can do. Well, democracy, the very theory of democracy is that by the people, for the people. we're not seeing true democracy in action anyway. But also, where is the church? Where is the church? Where is the church? Where is the church rising up and doing the things the government isn't doing? Where is the church rising up and saying, you know what, even though this is happening and that's happening, we are going to step in and help here? Where is the church risking persecution, risking closure, risking all of those things to do the things that they know are right, even if it goes against, and I'm not speaking about civil disobedience here. I'm speaking about filling a gap. But if it eventually lands up in civil disobedience, because that's the only thing that works, but I'm speaking about filling a gap. Instead of sitting back and saying, well, you know, the government are supposed to make sure all women are safe. How about the church makes sure all women are safe? How about the fact that actually women aren't even safe in the church? It starts with us. It starts with us. It starts with how we treat people. It starts with how we are. It starts with how we lead the little Benjamins, the generations that are still to come, how we lead them and how we allow them to lead. It starts with us as the church, not looking for scapegoats and other organizations and things to take the things and do the things, but stepping up and saying, okay, you know, this policy is stupid. It's created this issue. Okay, the church, we're going to step in and we're going to help, assist, love. Because one man made a decision in the book of Judges, in that particular story, that impacted generations. Generations, people. One man refused to take responsibility for his actions and impacted generations. There was no church then. But where were the God-fearing Israelites who should have stood up and said, no, this is not actually the way we should be doing things. Let him take responsibility for what he did. Where were the God-fearing Israelites? And yes, they said to the Lord, must we go up against Benjamin? And the Lord was like, okay. Why? Because he had lifted his hand of he was lifting his hand of restraint. And he was like, you know what, you guys, you do you, because you don't want me to be your king anymore. You constantly want somebody else to lead you. You don't want to hear from me each individually. You wanted Moses to be your intermediary. And ever since then, you wanted somebody to be your intermediary. Somebody to be in between you and me. You know what? You do you. All of this to say, as we close, that when you get out of bed in the morning and you put your feet on the floor and you say, Lord, let God arise, let his enemies be scattered, and let those who hate him flee before him. You are also saying, Lord God, I will do what you have called me to do. I will be a voice for the voiceless. I will be an encourager to the generations that are coming up, who aren't interested in church as we know it because they have seen the aftermath. I will be one who isn't holding on so hard to control, and you know that I recognize that actually we need to let the young ones come up and do their thing. Let us be those who leave a legacy of righteousness, a legacy of holiness, a legacy of purity. Let us be those who are unafraid to let our voices be heard, even if we feel like they are being drowned out by the noise of everybody else's voices. Let us stand with God. And let us be there for those who cannot help themselves. And let us be responsible and accountable for our actions and not just palm them off on some other. So, I trust you got the gist of what I was trying to say with using that story. But it was just like, oh, Jesus. Really, it says in Ecclesiastes, there is nothing new under the sun. There really isn't. And yes, it's a terrible story. But there is hope because God brought Jesus. And so we have hope. And so we get to not have to be like that. We get to not have to be like that. And that's just the biggest blessing. So, I love you all. Bless you all. Please love and share this broadcast so that others, I just assume that when I go live, it pops up in your feed. Apparently, that's not what happens. You know, technology, algorithms, and me, we don't see eye to eye. So please love and share so that people know about the page, Sally Gooder Ministries, and so that they can come and get the word of the Lord and hear about Church Without Walls and Igera Prophetic School and all the incredible things. I love you all. Have a fabulous Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. And I will see you again on Monday morning at 7 a.m. for Start Your Week with Sally. Love you. Bless you.